Welcome to Classy Tech Calibrations. Today we're going to unbox, set up, and show the recommended settings that I have for the Hisense U8H. My review for the U8H will be following this in the next few days, so keep an eye out for that. Overall, it's been a positive experience, and I think it's going to be a popular model in 2022 and through some of 2023. Alright, so starting with the box, Hisense does have a full image painted onto it, as well as all of these supported features, as well as using the bad taglines like motion rate 480. That needs to stop. Alright, so we pop it open. The legs are actually taped down in the box. Nothing should be moving around. Pretty well packed. You got a thick piece of cardboard and foam in front of the screen. Remove that part. You see the foam and the cardboard stays in the box. And then you can just either lift the TV out, which they don't really recommend, or you can take off the pinch tabs on the sides of the box and open the box that way. It was interesting to see that the remote, paperwork, and power cable were in a bag taped to the inside instead of in that top foam. The legs are just simple left and right with only one place to go. Can't really mess it up. 2 screws for each, no problem. And then here it is on the legs. You can see they stand pretty high and should be able to accommodate most sound bars as long as they aren't very long. Looking at the back, you'll find a fairly large subwoofer that's also tunable in the settings, as well as your VESA mounting holes. And if we look over at the ports, you can see they're broken into 2 segments. You got 4 HDMI ports, 2 of them are 2.1 with 1 being eARC. You get 2 USB ports, the ATSC antenna port, and audio in, headphone out, and then your LAN and Toslink audio. So I've shown on many videos how to set up Google TV. So in this one, what I'm actually going to do is show that you can set this up as a non-smart TV or just bypass setting up the account and doing all of that. You can also see the reflection handling in that image, as well as just some general haloing around objects during the setup process. But once you get to real content, it's not nearly as noticeable. All right, even when selecting basic TV, you still have to agree to Google's terms of service. But once you're done with all this, you'll be greeted by a fairly basic looking Google home screen compared to if you did set up an account and have all of the apps. So the general settings and layout of this are a little bit different than if you were to use, say, a Sony TV. So if you look at the remote and you see that button with the 3 lines above the Netflix button, that pulls up this menu. That's very important because if you're going to use the HDMI ports, you have to come here and set it to enhanced or you won't get HDR. So that's something that it doesn't tell you, and it doesn't tell you the name of that button or what it does. Also in this menu, you'll find the game settings, which is kind of a more basic version of LG's Game Optimizer or Samsung's Game Bar. And then also you'll find the menu for scaling options if your source is below 4K, as well as all your sound options. So whether you are using eARC or if you're using the built-in speakers, you have the sound menu to adjust the built-in TV speakers, as well as use the equalizer, and then you have audio output to set up your eARC, ARC, or Toslink audio, things like that. If you go down to advanced system, you can see that's where like store mode is, as well as clearing the cache if your operating system starts to feel pretty slow. And then if you're at just the main watching TV and you hit the settings button, it brings up that first little menu, and then you go down and over and you can go to your picture settings that way. It's going to come with it in energy save. I recommend changing that to Filmmaker. So right now we are in SDR. In SDR, the local dimming, you really don't need to have it set on anything in particular. By lowering the backlight to around 10, that's about 150 nits. And that's also going to make your black levels much deeper the lower that you can have that. So everything else here is pretty much fine as it is. And then we're going to go down to advanced and color temperature. Low is actually the warm setting that's very close to D65, so we want to leave it on that. And then all the motion stuff in Filmmaker should be off by default, but if you want to adjust them to your preference, you go ahead. There's plenty of options for tuning the motion on this. Motion clearness is your black frame insertion, and then you have the noise reduction settings, as well as the HDMI black level, which it calls HDMI dynamic range. Your active contrast is dynamic contrast enhancer. Color space you want to leave on auto. Instant game response is ALLM. You can have that on if you're going to be using gaming on the same input. Anything under calibration settings, I don't recommend that you change unless you have equipment to actually do measurements and make proper adjustments to them. Unless you just want to change the gamma setting, that's fine. You would use 2.2 if it's a brighter room, though for the most part I strongly recommend leaving it in BT 1886, as this TV will lift shadows already anyway, so you shouldn't have any problem seeing shadow detail. Alright, so now if we go over to HDR content, I just want to show first how the local dimming setting is working here. So you basically need it on high for all HDR content. You can see with it off how washed out it looks, and if we go to low or medium, then there's too much crushing near black, as well as a slight reduction in the brightness of highlights when it's not in high. So also when it's in high, it does track the PQ EOTF curve much more closely, whereas again, medium and low will have crushing near black and high doesn't, at least in HDR10. So we'll discuss Dolby Vision when we get there. Alright, so while you're in HDR10 content, the Filmmaker Mode again is what we want to use. It is the most accurate. However, there is one important setting that you have to change in order for it to be so. When you first select Filmmaker Mode, it's probably going to look very dark, and that's because it defaults with the ambient light sensor turned on, and that needs to be turned off. So once you turn off the ambient light sensor or automatic light sensor, then you'll see that it brightens up and looks a lot better. Other than that, just make sure the local dimming is on high. All these other settings can be at default. And we're going to go down to advanced. And again, you can set up your motion and noise reduction settings to how you like. Dynamic tone mapping should stay off. All it does is actually just compress the overall dynamic range and does not do anything positive. The TV by default has good tone mapping. And then again, white balance, things like that. Nothing in the calibration menu should you be touching unless you have equipment to do it properly. And then that's going to be it for HDR10, and that is what I recommend you use. I do not recommend Dolby Vision on this TV in any of these modes. All of them, no matter what you do, they're far from accurate. They're lifting way above EOTF, and it way over brightens the image. Now you might like that, especially if you're in a bright room, but for accurate representation or critical darkroom viewing, I do not recommend using the Dolby Vision on this TV. If you must, then I would say set the local dimming to medium, because that will darken it a little bit, and it shouldn't crush details like it does in HDR10 because it's already so lifted. And this is using the Dolby Vision dark mode, which is the best of the ones available. And you can see it won't let me go down because the local dimming is the only setting in the backlight menu that's adjustable with this picture mode. Alright, and then again here, just make sure that we are in the low color temperature. Everything else, a lot of this stuff, it skips right over because you're not allowed to change anything. Everything is very minimal that you can change. And again, I recommend turning off Dolby Vision at your source and letting the TV play everything in HDR10. Now let's move over to gaming. So in gaming, SDR for the backlight, I put it to 25. I think that's a pretty decent setting of trying to get bright without being too bright and raising our black level. It's going to make sure the color temperature is in low again, and there's really not much else to do here. Turn on FreeSync if you're on an Xbox or a Radeon graphics card on your PC. Gamma, again, I recommend BT 1886. Even if it is a bright room, try it out. And then if we go into HDR Gaming, so we're going to use the Xbox HDR menu here. Make sure that the light sensor is turned off. And then, again, just the basic stuff here. It's going to automatically skip over everything you can't adjust in game mode, which is fine. There's really not much to do in game mode here. And then on the Xbox itself, for the HDR setup, make sure that first screen is all the way left or all the way black. And then for the two white screens, it actually clips at 1300, so you're going to set those to 1300 nits. Pull both triggers and both bumpers at the same time to get those little values to pop up in the top right corner of the screen when setting up the Xbox. For the PlayStation, that should be 16 clicks if you count them, would put you where this TV should be. And then that's it. So I hope this helps you out, and again, hope to see you in my U8H review coming in the next few days. Have a good one.